Sanju, are you ready to share?
Sure, just give me one sec.
Okay, thanks very much.
I'll
Right,
do
thanks for
that.
coming.
Are,
Thank,
are we ready to go here from my side then?
pardon me.
Would you like me to get started then?
Yes, please. Thanks very much.
Okay, just give me one sec, please. So, can you hear me?
Yes, we can see your presentation too. Thanks.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you, John, and thank you, Darren, and everyone there for this great opportunity to present to you. As you know, my name is Sanju Advani. I'm with IDT, International Development of Technology. We are now part of the Star Insurance Companies group through Star Consulting Services as an associate member of that team. Uh, what I am going to be talking about today are the lessons we have learned, particularly with the Part 121 or the large aircraft operators at the airline level. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I've been involved in UPRT from both a conceptual point of view as well as implementation. And implementation includes in the regulations, working with ICAO, EASA, and other agencies, as well as in the airlines themselves. So helping airlines to incorporate this in a way that is suitable for them and suitable for their needs. I'm based in the Netherlands. My company's based in the Netherlands, but I happen to be in Canada because I'm here for a very exciting and interesting conference. And the conference is on a different subject, slightly different. It's on sustainability in aviation. I'm the co-chairman of the Waterloo Institute for Sustainable Aeronautics, and tomorrow I'll be presenting with colleagues, including Captain John Craig from Air Canada. He's the head of training of Air Canada, and Commander Chris Hadfield, a very well-known astronaut. The purpose of this institute is to deal with the ecological sustainability, financial sustainability, as well as social sustainability. So we have some very interesting discussions going on along those lines. And although it's not directly related to UPRT, training is a very, very important part of making aviation more sustainable. And I'm really glad to be a part of that process as well. Anyway, getting on with UPRT. Now, I know a lot of this will come across as well-known information to you. I recognize that. There's a lot of knowledge in that room and with the online participants. But I just want to set the stage because there's some really interesting points that we have discovered in the last few years that I'm very happy to share with you. But I need to build up that story. Now, we know that upsets are very, very unlikely, but if they do occur, they are very dangerous. And when an upset occurs, we know that the pilot's cognitive level drops while the stress level goes way up. That's the opportunity for disaster. And that's one of the things that we need to train for. So it's very challenging for pilots to deal with upsets and stalls. And also, we see in transport category airplanes what has happened when they enter those stalls. It's not the same kind of behavior as in the training airplane, which they may have had a long, long time ago. So you can understand what the problem is. So, why are we doing all this training? Because of those very high risks. We know that swept wing jets, especially at high altitude, have very unstable conditions or characteristics. We know that swept wing jets can have a snappy stall with one wing losing lift faster than the other, and the airplane going on its back very quickly. And we know that transport category airplanes are actually very fragile. They're designed to optimize their payload range, meaning that the structures are very thin and quite breakable. They meet the certification criteria, but they're not built like fighter jets. So what we can actually start to comprehend here is that loss of control is not really a loss of the airplane's control, but the pilot losing control over that vehicle for whatever reason it might be. And that's why throughout the last decade, we have introduced upset prevention and recovery training. Now, the biggest thing that I want to focus on is the instructor, because if we think about it, the only element in the chain that can fill that missing knowledge and those skills is the instructor. Think about it. In an operation, in an airline, it's the knowledge of the instructor and the ability of that instructor to teach that makes all the difference in the world. And I'm sure all the instructors in the room are nodding their heads saying, yes, this is what we do. And this is where I believe the most focus needs to lie. Now, remember, I come from an engineering background. I'm an engineer, aerospace engineer. I've worked in flight simulators for many, many decades. Yet I do fly. I fly light airplanes. And I've done a lot of work in UPRT, and I've seen that really we need to continue to drive that aspect of it, the instructor. Now, the thing that we need to do is not just simply train an instructor. It's not that easy a task because this knowledge often is very new for instructors. And that's what we see. We work with many of the major airlines. In fact, we have 13 flag carriers who are our customers and several others as well. And we notice that the lack of knowledge, it's not a fault of the instructor, it's a fault of the system for letting the system allow pilots to gain these skills at a basic level at a flying school, and then later on not really revisit them in the domain of the airplane that they actually fly, meaning either a turboprop or a swept wing jet or whatever it may be. So we not only have to train the instructors, but we have to validate them. And that's been a big part of our work is making sure that those instructors pass on the right message. Now, what we notice when we train airlines, one of the biggest lessons learned is hand them the materials, teach them the materials, and then when you observe it, you'll see that there are deviations from the intended message and from what they are actually delivering. And that's where we need to intervene as trainers. Then comes the job of standardization. So once they're trained, then all of them have to work together to help each other to achieve and maintain that standard. What we've seen is it's not as easy as it looks. It's challenging. So what are the ingredients to all of this? How do we put a package together? First of all, we need the knowledge. And I know John mentioned earlier today the AERTA, the revision 2 and the revision 3. Both of them are very good. There's a lot of other knowledge as well. Here's an interesting fact, though. The knowledge that an instructor really needs in order to train this material properly is not published knowledge. It's knowledge that has to be gained. It's knowledge that has to be developed internally and then passed on to those instructors. So it's not just the aerodynamic knowledge, but the knowledge on how to train these specific competencies. Then we need a training program. That program should include the yellow items here, which are the prevention items, awareness and recognition, as well as the recovery. It should be type specific because there are different characteristics. And what we're trying to do here with the program is reconnect. Remember I said earlier, it's the lack of connection between the pilot and the airplane. we want that pilot to reconnect with that particular airplane. So looking at the PFD, looking at the speed indications, the angle of attack indications, attitudes, and so on, being able to connect to those aspects. And it must be aligned with the OEM. That's a very important aspect because we need to work with the OEMs to make sure that anything that is trained is aligned with their recommendations. Now, almost all OEMs have worked together to create the recovery templates, like the stall recovery templates through different working groups. And so therefore, most of this is already well aligned. And what our job is as instruction is to make it as straightforward as possible. Going back to my very first point, these upsets occur at a time when the pilot's stress level is very high. So making it easy is very important. And it has to be compliant with the regulations. I mentioned that as the last point because compliance is not the difficult thing. It's the development of the competencies that is the difficult thing. And the FSTD. This is a big point of discussion. Now, we have to properly use that FSTD. Every single FSTD has a valid envelope, and we have to stay within that valid envelope and recognize what that is. And so part of the training of the instructor is to understand what that envelope means. And then we can design the training based on maneuver-based and scenario-based. Now, one of the big challenges for the airlines is to come up with programs that are both effective and efficient. And we've seen a lot of challenges in that area, and we've been fortunate to help many airlines in producing programs that work for them with whatever devices they have. Because remember, a lot of the awareness and recognition and even recoveries can be performed in simulators which have not been extended. You just have to make sure you're staying within the valid envelope of that device. Now, I want to go to the next point. Working with EASA, we came up, I know that Mark mentioned he was part of this working group as well. We came up with a very interesting structure. The future pilot will go from a flying school, learn basic UPRT, which is orientation and understanding of basic concepts, move on to advanced UPRT, which is more of the aggressive maneuvers to create the physiological and psychological conditions of an upset type of situation, and to expose them to those conditions of being upside down, being in a spin or in those types of maneuvers and being able to recover. Now, that is taught by a UPRT qualified instructor who must undergo specialized training in order to deliver that. Then the pilot progresses to the airline level, doing class and type UPRT, which is part of the type rating or the class rating, and then moves on to the airline. And that's what we call the operator level UPRT. Now, what a beautiful situation in the future when you have pilots going through basic and advanced, getting their type rating. UPRT is just then integrated in everything they do, and it no longer even becomes a special term. I hope someday that the word UPRT will simply fade away and be embedded in everything we do. How great will that be? However, we have a problem today because we don't have the basic advanced in class and type or the UPRT instructor skills available for every airline pilot. So while this is a beautiful integrated concept from the basic to the operator level, today's problem is this. This is what the operators need. How do we gain those skills, those competencies at the airline level, right? Now, here's a possible methodology. Please consider this. The fact is, the pilots operating today have a wide background. They may have done some aerobatics. in addition to their line operations. They've done some upset recovery training maybe in the past, some military flying, helicopters, etc., etc., etc. So we have a variable level of pilot UPRT competency at the start. Now, what we need to do is elevate those pilots to increase their knowledge step by step. And this requires going back to the basics, understanding angle of attack, understanding energy, understanding the human factors. This doesn't mean throwing them into an upset right away. It means building up those competencies, again, as I said, step by step. At this point, we would then be entering this level that I explained, the operator level UPRT of today. So we need to establish the baseline first. Then comes the next level, which is the recurrent UPRT, which is defined by EASA. So this is one way of solving that problem of how do we bring our pilots up to the standard today. We can't put them all back, thousands of pilots back into basic flying school. We have to do something with what we have, with the resources we have today. Now, what we've seen from this approach is it gives both the pilots and the instructors the opportunity to learn these basics and to teach these basics. It's a step-by-step way. It takes more time. It takes more effort. Interestingly, what we've seen is airlines who have started the UPRT, where they started at a recurrent level, where they start maybe doing 30 minutes or 45 minutes a year, they're coming back. They're taking a step back and realizing maybe we need to take a step back, rewind a little bit, and do that operator initial UPRT. That's a very interesting thought. Now, what we're doing here is we're first standardizing everyone, all the instructors and all the pilots. And then it's much easier in this way to maintain those standards. This is a modular approach, but it's one that we feel very confident works quite well. And this is the implementation path. Now, what I see the biggest lesson learned of this, pilots love UPRT. They come back to us and say, we never knew that we could connect with our airplane in this manner. And what we've learned from this are some really basic tenets of the behavior of the airplane. And let me mention a few of them. We mentioned this earlier. Stalls are really critical. The airplane starts to become unstable, and if we enter a stall, it can become, the behavior of a stall, near a stall or beyond a stall in a transport category aircraft is very different from the light plane that we learn in. So it's really important to be able to convey these bits of information through the academic, through the ground school, but also through the simulator so that they have a better understanding. Secondly, as I mentioned earlier, we cannot simply pull hard. We'll break the airplane and we'll make the situation worse. Transport airplanes are designed for payload range optimization. They're not designed to be flown around and thrown around in the way that fighter jets would be. Another really important thing is redeveloping and reestablishing the connection between the pilot and the airplane. So there's a lot behind these bullets that I'm explaining to you, and I'd be happy to go into more details with you on an individual basis. But what we're talking about is things like being able to interpret the flight envelope from the primary flight display. Normally, in UPRT, we think of using a modified simulator with all of the tools to help the instructor. That's great, and I totally support that. However, it's even more important for the instructor to be able to teach the pilot what they should be looking at in the event of an upset. Because remember, the pilot is on board the airplane. He doesn't have the instructor. He or she may not have an iOS on board in an airplane. Of course you will not. So we have to reconnect the pilot with the airplane. And this has been one of the biggest areas of our focus is to extract the information in a type-specific manner and present it to the pilot so that they can interpret it at the time of need, at the time of crisis as well. So, like I just said, things like this. How can you actually portray the flight envelope on the PFD? Well, we found some very interesting tools in order to be able to do that, and that's part of the training programs. So my final words, few points. We strongly recommend that airlines don't wait to get started on UPRT. You know, getting started doesn't mean that's the end game. Simulators should and will be upgraded, but that doesn't mean that the starting block should be a perfect simulator, because don't let perfection get in the way of doing a perfectly good training program. UPRT is safety critical, and it's important that all airlines around the world get moving on this very quickly. And make the program comprehensive, yet keep it simple for the pilots. So in programs that we've developed, they may have 50, 55 exercises to develop those skills in the operator initial, and then progressing from those later on to simpler, smaller exercises to maintain those skills in a recurrent training. And it should be pulled by the training needs. It should not be a technology push. This is a really important point as well. I like to say this: compliance is not a guarantee of safety. Simply being compliant doesn't guarantee you anything, in fact. You've got to put the effort into the instructor, because that's the most critical link. A properly developed program with really well-trained, validated, and standardized instructors is really the name of the game. That's how we have to progress here. Now, I know your time is very critical as well there in this conference. You only have a day. So I'm just putting my contact information here. If anyone's interested, please feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be delighted to speak to you on at any time.
Thanks, Sanju. Are you
I
open
hope.
for some? Are you open for some questions?
Of course. Shoot, go ahead.
G'day, Sanju. Shane Tobin here from UPRT Australia. Great presentation. Thank you. Just a question for you. The roadmap that you put up in regards from basic UPRT, advanced UPRT, type class operator, and then going up to UPRT instructor, sitting above the operators. Yep. That seems to be that your proposed pathway is to have UPRT instructors come from sort of the airline world, come back to being an advanced UPRT instructor. Are you getting any sort of buy-in from the airlines in Europe to see if that to making that actually come to fruition, and do they see the advantage in that?
I think they do, and it may not necessarily be airline instructors who then become UPRT instructors. These instructors would have to have a specific UPRT instructor rating and maintain that rating. So it's quite a strict standard. It's not exactly the same as an aerobatic rating. However, it is the only point at which, from a regulation, an instructor upgrade is actually required, mandated. And it's from a safety point of view as well. And it's not just the instructor, it's the whole operation. All of the safety mechanisms have to be in place, because when you're teaching actual UPRT on airplane, you need those skills, you need the qualifications. Maybe someone else would be who knows about this subject as well would like to jump in.
Thanks, Sanju. It's Roger Crossway from CASA.
Yes.
I'd like to just pick up on a couple of points, if you don't mind.
No problem.
And I'm making the points in the context of the Australian environment, which in some respects has some differences in other parts of the world.
Of course.
The first one is to pick up your point that you said the instructor is the only element missing. I understand that that could be true where the training operator and the content of training, the constructs within the training programs aren't regulated or mandated or critical parts of the system. In which case it does place a very high dependency on the instructor. That's not the case in Australia. All our training, with so few exceptions, is managed under an organisational structure.
Yes, I understand.
With its systems. So I just contest that in the Australian context, it's the instructor is not the missing element. I think there's a lot more to it than that.
So let me just qualify that. I didn't mean to say that's the missing element, but it's the only element that can directly influence because the instructor sees what that pilot is doing. The instructor is the only one who gets to actually witness how that pilot is interpreting the information, utilizing the information, and applying those skills and knowledge.
Sanjay, I respect that point, but that's true of all training.
Yeah.
In the end, it is the instructor that's there delivering it and assessing and managing progress and all of those things. UPRT is not unique in that sense. It is another kind of training. So I still maintain my point that the instructor is not the critical missing element. Instructors are valuable, important, and essential, but so too are the elements of the training equation.
Right.
The second
Yeah.
point I'd like to just query, I guess, is we've heard other points of view today about the similarities between the light or lighter aeroplane space or context and the heavier space. And the takeout I've got is that there's a bit of a disagreement about that, and I'm just wondering how best to address that conundrum.
That's a very good point. We know that in a light airplane, the aerodynamics are 100% accurate. We know that we can create startle to 100% level. We can create a lot of the physiological forces as well, exactly as they are. We cannot do that in a simulator. And this brings me back to the very early days of ICATI, where we said there is no single solution for UPRT. It would be fantastic if we could do this in a commercial transport airplane. Not feasible, not safe. We cannot do that. Of course, there are many similarities between a light airplane and leaving money aside, just purely thinking from a physical point of view, there are many similarities. There are also differences. And a simulator is a great place to train those differences. Think about the lift coefficient curve. In a light airplane, it might pick up like this and then drop all of a sudden. Whereas in a commercial transport airplane with a swept wing, it may be more flat. And the first indications of stall may be very different. Maybe a warning, maybe a buffet, maybe something else. The concepts are very similar indeed. And so that's why EASA wanted to introduce this, because in the future, the notion is that pilots coming through the basic, the advanced, getting the type rating and class rating, then moving to the airlines, will have the basic foundations. But it doesn't end there. It continues, and it has to be an ongoing, recurrent basis. Does that kind of answer your question?
Thanks for that. I can see both sides. I'm not sure that the conundrum's been resolved. I don't have a problem in my mind, but I just pick up that nuance, I guess, between the various presentations. But thank you.
Yeah. Well, I'm all for the on-airplane training. Don't get me wrong. if we could put every single pilot in the world back into a light airplane and give them an advanced maneuver training, fantastic. It's just not really feasible. And the question has been raised so many times by the working groups. Is it feasible? Is it efficient? Is it effective? Does the knowledge even transfer properly? We had the OEMs actually in our ICADI meetings discussing that, saying, well, the differences are so large, we'll never be able to fill those gaps. I mean, I have no opposition to people providing on-airplane training. Absolutely not. But we have to live in the reality of the world today as well. So we have to find the best balance of these things. And what EASA has done, I think, is commendable. Make sure that the basic training is properly structured and properly validated and properly regulated as well. Maybe there are more.
I have a interjection at this point. This is Peter Ireland. Sanju, love the little bit on the compliance and safety. There's a number of us here that have actually seen the consequences of excessive weight on compliance that have actually ended up with jet upsets because of that, with overreaction by flight crew. The flight crew essentially not knowing what they're doing, but in order to attempt to stay within 1 knot of an overspeed or otherwise, and pulling 1.8 G in the recovery and the ensuing out of control event. Yeah, so compliance certainly does not equate in linearly to safety. With the comments just made before by the gentleman from CASA. In my experience in flight test and doing aerobatics since since military and in various other aircraft since then, I'm not sure that basically, apart from a couple of very specific matters, that basically there's no crossover between the two. But the other point was around slide number 4 at 4.5 minutes, comment about the type specificity of training. I don't actually see that. Every swept-wing aircraft that I've stalled pretty much behaves the same, even with the fact that it's got a high thrust line or low thrust line. Essentially, the basic aerodynamics are fundamental. Whether or not they were done particularly well in the first place is another matter. But essentially, if you keep the blue on the top and the shiny side up, if you basically manage your pitch and your angle of attack specifically, the airplanes maintain recovery. They are recoverable. And that is very much exactly the same as the light aircraft case. The only issues in there is that at high altitude, essentially stalling an airplane at high altitude, swept wing, whatever, is actually a remarkably gentle occurrence in its own right. But we consistently screw it up. We end up with aircraft spiraling into the dirt because of the response that the flight crew get. In the simulator, we've got the opportunity to, even with a low fidelity model, we've got the capability of modeling that to the extent that the guys should be able to keep the shiny side up. The second item was on stability, stall stability, etc. The aircraft, even at high altitude, the actual stability of everything that comes out with a Part 25 certificate is fundamentally stable. About the only airplane that I can know of that has an issue with stability at all is if you do an MMO speed brake pull on a Learjet. That's the one aircraft that goes really ugly fast. Otherwise, they all do the same thing. Our failures are fundamentally with the Airbuses, we forget to trim. With all of the large transport aircraft, we forget about the thrust line and the stabilizer. And my only concern between doing this in a Cessna 152 Aerobat or in the simulator is that the correct concept follows through, that basically you've got to be able to unload the angle of attack in order to actually regain control. And that's the first thing. And that anything that we're doing that messes that up, basically is going to complicate things. I would rather see a really simple program, because we need the idiot's guide to the universe here, rather than a PhD in aerodynamics. And every single
Totally
aeroplane
agree.
fundamentally
Yeah.
is a lawn dart, and all our job is just to stop it hitting the ground. It's a very simple thing
Yeah.
to do.
It is.
So,
And that's why I say go back to the basics. Build a program that is simple but comprehensive. And if I may just interject, your point about the type-specific aspect, the big word here is recognition. We shouldn't forget the term recognition, because teaching the pilot to recognize exactly what their particular airplane is telling them, whether it has a barber pole or not, that makes a difference. Flight path vector, pitch limit indicators, all of the clues that a pilot could have at that moment in time, depending on the mode that they're flying in, the type of airplane, those all play a role in how they're going to recognize that information, assess it, and make the proper assessment of that.
I would counter that, Sanju, with the point that looking at those baubles and paraphernalia that are on the PFD or whatever we're going to call it today, all of that stuff basically gets in the way of looking out the window and actually understanding what the airplane's doing. We don't need 99% of that stuff. Actually, it causes a cognitive overload of the driver of the bus. What we need is basically a simple stuff like which way is the sky pointer going, and essentially what we've been trying to do for many years is keep it down to the very simple stuff. If we're looking at details, all we're doing is increasing the time to get a recovery, because the temporal requirement is extended, and that every second delayed when you're 10 or 20 degrees nose down, when you certify the aircraft, you've got a offset. You're supposed to do 75% cruise thrust descent, 7.5 degrees negative angle of flight path at for 20 seconds from your cruise nominated cruise speed. And that's the sort of time in the overspeed period that you're actually supposed to be able to sort out your act. That's what the certification covers. If we're covering everything that's in there, instead of just simplifying it to the very basic stuff, where is the blue, where is the sky pointer, and what am I doing here? Am I upside down or otherwise? Literally, the only difference that I can see.
But we both agree, actually, because let's take any random airplane, okay, 777 pilots, okay? Now we're going to do what? Are we going to put them back in a generic simulator? No, we're going to put them in their 777 simulator and teach them these skills. And in other words, filter out the crap, filter out the nonsense, focus only on the important parameters. So we completely agree, both of us. We're just expressing it from two different points of view. I'm not saying that make it complex. Did I say keep it simple? Build it up step by step. If they don't understand angle of attack, they won't understand stall. If they don't know how to interpret angle of attack in a very basic, fundamental way, they will not understand it, right? So we totally agree. Other points?
Yes, sorry, Sanjay. Matt Savage. I had the privilege of coming across to the States and working with the FAA and doing on-jet training, and also stuff with Brian Burke up in Alaska.
Okay.
That's just to give you a bit of background. You mentioned in your slide about the importance of compliance with the OEM, yet making sure that compliance doesn't come in the front of safety. When it comes to turboprop world and the emphasis on pitch levers going to full fine and power, and then some of the OEMs describing that their stall recovery checklist is pre-stall, they're still utilizing the same technique post critical angle of attack. Where do you sit with that? And when we've had discussions with OEMs, and that's a very challenging space.
It's a very challenging space. We've had those discussions through our clients. We have a huge number of turboprop clients using all the different turboprops from very small, even single engine, up to the large ones, the most popular ones. Indeed, that's an area of discussion. And I hinted to the fact that some of these manufacturers were not privy to or did not participate in the working groups where such things were standardized, because in the end, the airplane aerodynamically is very similar. We need to get that angle of attack down and forget about the instant worry about maintaining height, because we know that that can make things worse. And we need to do the following steps systematically but quickly. So these discussions are not over yet. We've just been having these in the past weeks as well, and it's an ongoing thing, and we hope that the mindset will also adapt and change over time. We'll see where we can take this, but we continue to persist on more standardization in that aspect. And I'm really thankful that you brought this up, because turboprops seem to have been sort of forgotten in some aspects. And I think it's very important, because the number of loss of control accidents in turboprops is really low. However, the relative number is much higher than in jets, much, much higher.
It's just an interesting space when Bombardier or people like that are still pushing that power is so fundamentally important in a stall recovery. And I think from the Qantas Group's point of view, that's a very challenging space.
It's not just that. It's not just Bombardier. It's others as well, and we're dealing with that right at this minute, at this very moment. But we're getting there, and I think with the support of people like yourselves, the industry working together, I think we can make headway here. It only makes sense. I mean, it should be standardized throughout an airline. Some airlines operate turboprops. The pilots go from a turboprop to a jet and vice versa. There's no need to create differences. Now, unless there is a very solid physics-based need for those differences, whatever it may be, that's okay. But we're trying to consolidate this.
Great.
Any other questions?
Thanks, Sanju. Any very quick points in summary? John? Yeah, thank you, Sanju. Just passing those thanks on from John and Roger. So appreciate your facilitation today. Thanks very much.
You're most welcome. And if there are any questions, please don't hesitate to send me an email or get in touch with me through LinkedIn, whatever you wish.
Thank you.
Regulatory Oversight Division, based here in Sydney, with a background in military and airline operations and as a regulator, both here and overseas. Wayne, as he mentioned earlier this morning, is in charge of the allocation of duties of the entry control for assess and approve phase of UPRT program. So some of you will have already met him or some members of his team. Chris Loynes is here. Glenn Chase is here. Steve Koenig is absent on leave, and Quentin and I are back at the mothership in Flight Standards Branch. So Wayne's been doing this business as usual work for CASA for a while. I'll hand it over to him.
Thanks, John, and thanks to all our online attendees and also all the people in person here today for coming. John and I and Chris Loynes went up to Caboolture back in July, wasn't it, or beginning of August? Beginning of August, yeah. And Paul and his team were up there, and we had a insight into the GA area, which I'll address shortly. But the entry control starts with your application, and bearing in mind that at the moment the legislation is only in Part 121 in the MOS requirement, even though, as Paul said, it's addressed in a form in Part 61 in the competencies. It's not on the type rating competencies. There's upset, but not to the extent that we expect for a full UPRT approval. So you apply to Reg Services, that's the form, and it goes into Reg Services, then it goes to allocations and estimates, and they'll usually give a estimate of between 12 and 15 hours, and that also depends on where your simulators are. So if the simulator's overseas, like in Singapore, and we haven't assessed, it's a contracted training over there, then we'll have to go over there, and I've got to go over there shortly to assess a course, an induction, conversion induction course. It'll be bumped up somewhat. So that'll add expense. Once the operator then pays the estimate, and bear in mind it's only an estimate. If we need any more money, we'll come to the operator and put our hand out. It'll come to me and I'll allocate. And at the moment, there's only me and the team. I'm the Boeing guy. I get assistance from a guy called Peter Marsh, who is a very experienced Boeing operator as well, but he's in OIB at the moment. Steve Koenig does the Airbus. I've got Glenn Chase doing Saab and Dash 8, and I'm bringing Chris Loynes on. I'm mentoring him at the moment, and he's the Embraer business jet specialist. So there's not many in the team. We've got John as the head of the UPR team, and Quentin Fuller, who does the simulator evaluations, and Glenn Stempson. And unfortunately, both Glenn and Quentin are sick at the moment, or not well. So we've got a bit of a capability issue there, but we're addressing that. There's two parts to the entry control. One is, of course, and Sanjeev had this a very good slide there, which showed the induction conversion part and then the recurrent training. And that's what we're looking at. If you're already established operator, and we did our training at Qantas, they brought everyone up to that baseline standard. And then ongoing from that is the normal recurrent training incorporated into what we used to call cyclic training, but the check-in training system. If you're a new operator course, then there's that two parts. You've got to bring your pilots you've just employed up to that baseline standard, so they're all on the same standard before you start operations and get issued with your AOC. And then you expect to see at least 6 to 12 of your first two recurrent training modules with the UPRT incorporated in them, and then what your strategy is going to be for the next cyclic period of what you're going to bring into play. So things we're looking at is initially on that recurrent and that induction and conversion training is, of course, the theory side of things, and the skills training. So the theory side of things, we would expect to see what's normal, because if you look at the AC, the first thing is upset awareness. So you can't be aware of what's, if you're an upset, if you don't know what's not an upset. So we expect to see what's normal in every regime of flight, from takeoff, climb, cruise, descent, approach, and in the landing, or the missed approach. After that, then we expect you to implement the OEM and your company procedures for the for nose high, nose low, stalls, and getting those the wording and also the recovery for the MCP panel, all standard on that type, get that implemented. So that's that baseline foundation we'd expect to see before you get into the more complicated scenarios in your recurrent training of icing, bounce landings, turbulence if you fly under an A380 and get put upside down. So that's what we want to see initially. It's that principles of adult learning, of going from simple to complex, clear to abstract. So build that baseline foundation first, and then get into the more complicated scenarios of startle and surprise later on, because that's where that foundation training will come to the fore. So that's what we want to see. Also, what we're going to see in the training and checking in your exposition is how you're going to stop instructor drift. There's been many presenters here today, and you know, all have alluded to the importance and the criticality of the instructor. So we want to see that as time goes on, you don't get any instructor drift. How's your check and train organisation going to keep them updated from developments by the OEM, by ICAO, from CASA, and also from your own training and checking system, and stop any individual personality stuff coming into the training. That's very important. And that's along with you're required to do under the legislation a change management program if you're already an established airline, your risk analysis and the gap analysis. So that should be in your exposition as well. There's a couple of things we haven't addressed yet, and that is, and we've started to, but there's no legislation. It's reserved in the AC. Is helicopters. That will have to be a component later on. We haven't addressed, and Roger alluded to this, the in-aircraft with the GA area. We haven't. That's not even on our radar at the moment. Though, as Sanju just alluded to, and he's quite correct. If it starts from the very beginning, when a guy walks through the door on his first day and has that mindset, then it's very important. So, look, CASA is thinking about it, but we just haven't got to that yet. Lessons learned. What we're having some obstacles with is the older simulators. F-28s, F-100s, for example, which don't, or 146, which they haven't got the data points, the QTGs for them. And there's no test pilots alive anymore that did the original testing of those aircraft. So, you know, we're not going to stop your program, as everyone has said. It's like a bit like CPR. Better to do something than nothing at all. So what I've been doing is, with even startups, is start the theory. If it's a recognised course done by an SME, get this theory started. And if it's a simulator which doesn't comply, then we'll work with you to try, and if it's a F100, we may be able to use the 717 UPRT simulators. It's just fully compliant. If it stalls in a similar manner, etc. And if your technique is established, the technique is what's going to get you out of it. So, you know, John and I have spoken about this. You know, there are some aircraft simulators that don't have any data to 10 degrees above the stall. They just haven't got it. So we'll work with the operator on that. But most of the modern simulators have got all the goodies in with them. Icing, bounce landing, and the rest of the required. We work to, when we do an assessment, we have what they call a principal protocol worksheet. So we have a principal document which states what we're assessing. We have the protocol, and then we have this worksheet which we work to. And the first part of a course is the simulator. Has it got full stall training, capability, upset prevention, recovery training, icy model, gusty crosswind conditions, bounce landing. Now, Quentin Fuller will evaluate to that. When he does the evaluation, and there's one coming up in mid-October on the 7th-6th up in Brisbane, we'll look at that, and it then gets that on its qualification. So then we go into, is the device the same as the aircraft that you're operating? Or is it a close variant? And if it's not, then we have to look at things like that. So we work for that checklist, and what we can't tick off, then we'd have worked with you to say, look, you can start your program, but you won't be able to get those more complicated scenarios until such times as you have access to a simulator that does. Now, that may be 2 years down the track. So, you know, we're not going to demand that on day one. We're trying to work with you. We understand the cost of upgrading simulators, getting a store box and good technical things and like that. But that is also very expensive. We understand that as well. So we're willing to work with you on these things. John, do you want to add anything to that part? The instructors, as I said, we'll be looking at having an SME with 1 or 2, preferably 2. So you've got a fail-safe mechanism there within your organisation who can train the trainers. If you're an AOC 121, you're going to have a check and training system. If you're in the heavy aircraft, and therefore you're going to have to have a recurrent check and training system, and under legislation that's part of it is the UPRT. So we want firstly SMEs, and then they train the trainer, or your check pilots and your instructors, to make sure they're all on the same page. And there's standardisation. Refresher training, we want to see how those instructors do the UPRT refresher training, how often, and who's evaluating that. What's your standardisation proficiency check? And how you're keeping yourself updated with world practice. So are you getting constant bulletins from the OEM and from ICAO and other regulatory authorities like us, stating what trends are, if there's been any developments in UPRT, and so that you have the most up-to-date and best world practices. So if you've got those 2 components in there, the initial foundation training and then the recurrent training, and you've got at least the first 12 months, which will give you 2 recurrent training sessions, then a strategy for the rest of your cyclic period, and we're satisfied, we give that the approval to you. It's a separate instrument under a 121.010, and that's renewed every 3 years. And then surveillance, because we have a protocol now of it's got to be present and suitable on entry, and then it's got to be operational and effective when they do surveillance. So when surveillance comes along and does an audit on the operator, we'll make sure that it's operational, you're implementing what you say you're going to do, and it's effective. And that's by watching. We may sit in the cockpit and watching just normal crews, or during the cycling, watching normal crews do their UPRT component in the cycling. Any questions? I know it's frustrating at the moment because we are taking probably 6 weeks to process things at CASA. We have got a shortage of, like most organisations in Australia, shortage of employees and boots on the ground. But the hierarchy has assured us they're working to rectify that. So I'm hoping that that will shorten that time.
May I ask a question, please? This is Sanju here.
Yes, Sanjay, yeah.
So just a quick one. In the IASA CSF-STD, it was agreed that the simulators should be qualified up to the first indication of stall because that's as far as the training goes. Now, we understand there are differences. I don't have to tell this audience between a first indication of stall, whether that's an oral warning or a stick shaker or whatever it might be, and the actual stall. Aerodynamically, there are differences, of course. The recovery is the same. There are many arguments for going either way, but what it did do, though, is allow, let's say, a little bit easier qualification of simulators. Now, I'm not that easy about it. What I like to see is that, as you explained, I really like the word that you used, the technique being the same, the technique being proper, actually, but also the program, because if we have a program that gradually develops these skills of recognition, then you're not going to crank the airplane into a higher angle of attack. You should actually respond at the first indication of stall. Now, I'm curious what the direction is that CASA is going in with regards to the requirement for the stall, or let's say the post-stall capabilities. Maybe John, could you help answer that?
Yeah, thanks, Sanju. We, one of my colleagues and another part of Roger's team, Scott Watson, produced Part 121 and the Manual of Standards for it. And in it says part of the requirement of a Part 121 operation meets the Annex 6 requirement of having a transitional and recurrent UPRT program. And then the Manual of Standards just describes some dates and aircraft weights and seat numbers for that, and a compliance date, I think, which you have to have the program started by March next year. I haven't got the exact details. So the way that it worked, and Roger can complement this, is that in each part of Part 121 where CASA said you must do something, we pretty much provided for a guidance document, an acceptable means of compliance, to explain how to do that particular thing. And it is at an AMC level, much as the EASA regs are.
Okay.
So from our point of view, we took the policy decision early in the piece that we would follow the FAA Directive 2 and require the fidelity for the 10 and 9625 for that matter, and 10011, we would require the fidelity at the assessment at the moderate level of confidence, correct trend of magnitude, for up to 10 degrees beyond the first stall indication. And that's by the FAR 25 definition. So that could be stick shaker, could be full back stick, it could be stick pusher, or it could be unmistakable evidence of the stall by buffet and pitch. So from our point of view, it was a policy decision taken that we would go beyond what EASA was at that time. And as you know, the EASA regs also explain how to evaluate a simulator where it is compliant with that 10 degrees beyond the stall. Understanding that some operators would want that, and some Part 129 AOCs, offshore AOCs for international operators may be required by a host country to have that. So that was a policy decision by CASA to go that way and follow the FAA. If people have another way of demonstrating acceptable means of compliance, then they'd need to demonstrate that to us.
Okay.
You might have another.
Okay, that's clear. That answered my question. Thanks.
Say something to that, Roger?
Is it? Yeah.
Yeah.
Wayne, just a clarification for the room, I guess. I think I might have misunderstood you that the UPRT program assessment included an assessment of the management of change.
Change management. It's in the PPW.
Right. Okay.
But that's just in their exposition, and most of them are putting it in there now anyway, because they have to have a change management program and for this 121 and an SMS.
So just to
Yeah.
clarify, you're saying that when you get a UPRT assessment, you're also assessing the change management.
Well, it is a change management they're putting in there, and so they would have a change management program. They have to have as part of their 121 exposition, 119-121 exposition.
Okay, that's fine.
And so it's not a big part, but is a part which we look at. If haven't, we just make mention of it to them. But the main thing is, and I'll put this here. Where is it? It says in the protocol, it mentions the word change management, yeah. So it says, develop post-implementation. I develop the commence awareness with existing standard of validation. Develop post-implementation governance, including QA and SMS. So change management at the moment is going to be part of your SMS, and it is a change management. So it's a change in your training system. So what we're noticing is they are putting it in, because I'll be honest, I didn't know it was a requirement. I read the protocol, principal protocols in one of those, and things. Yeah. Yeah. So that's part of the change management. Your part of your change management process would be in your 119-121 exposition anyway. So so is that clear? It's part of the SMS and that, but is that not clear?
I guess the point I was trying to make was that the change management protocol should be in the exposition to start with, and that you are referring to that in the context of approving a UPRT program, not that you are approving per se the management.
No, I'm not approving the. It's already in this.
That's right.
And UPRT is part of that. So yeah, sorry if there's any confusion.
It came across to me that you're assessing the change management.
No. It's a change. So that's what's happening. You go ahead. Yeah. Thanks, mate. Yeah. Yeah, they would already have that in there under the transition. Yeah. I'm just seeing who's awake here after lunch. The other thing we understand is availability of SMEs. We've had some instances recently where SMEs have gone to other operators because everyone's short of pilots at the moment, and obviously, they're going for the highest bidder. So if that happens, providing they've already got that train-the-trainer course in place and they've trained some guys already, we're not going to take away your UPRT approval just because that happened. That is going to happen these days because there's such a shortage of labour in Australia, and especially in the pilot world. It's worldwide, actually. So if that is in place already, then you keep your UPRT approval if those check pilots have been, if the trainer has taken place. As I said, we're addressing the inspector shortage at the moment in the variety of types. If we haven't got a type-rated inspector, then we'll get a UPRT qualified inspector with a type-rated person, an SME, to follow him around and sit in. And we'll do that until we have enough inspectors who are UPRT qualified. With the new AOC, of course, there is no transition leeway there. You've got to have everything done, completed and in compliance before you get the AOC. So with an established, then it's sort of all in one hit. But with as Qantas here have done, and Virgin and Jetstar, etc. Yeah, so any more questions? I'm afraid I can't answer the GA area at the moment. I want to thank them for coming and the input we've had and inviting us up to Caboolture a couple of months ago. That was very interesting, especially the glider input that was there. And I agree. I think that slide that Sanju had pictured on his presentation was very good. I think it'd be ideal, but of course, this was only introduced in earnest, and we did it back in the 90s, I remember, with the NSET, didn't we? But it's changed a lot since then. And I think we need to catch up. It'll catch up before it goes from the schools all the way through like that. It'll come a time when that is the pathway, but I think that'll take time. That's it.
Well, my suggestion to that is let the others make mistakes and learn from them.
Through this next bit fairly quickly. It's just a presentation that our colleague Quentin would have made if he was here, just on the qualification standards for the UPRT. So since this program began, and annexes 1 and 6 started mandating this in November 2014, the ICAO document was upgraded, and that coincided with a period where the CASA moved to the second revision of their CSFSTD-A for aeroplanes, and the Americans had already brought in Directive 2 relating to their flight simulator training devices. They both brought into being with the ICAO document standards which would allow the required level of fidelity for training in that area where we require essentially correct trend of magnitude. We don't require test pilots to produce hundreds of data points. It wouldn't be very relevant because, as most of us know, every stall is different. What we want is a basic, as Sanju said and other people have said this morning, want a fairly standard approach to how to get out of that zone rather than the how to count how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. So the increasing fidelity, which is what it's all about, related to a few areas, and one of them was icing, as I mentioned before. I flew the MD-87 for a while in Northern Europe and in dreadful icing conditions, and the simulator had no relevance at all to its icing capabilities, none. You had to run full icing with 40 flap on approach for the last minute of the approach. I think it was that critical, and yet if you didn't, the simulator did nothing. You could just fly all day. That's the sort of thing we don't want, obviously. So the expansion in fidelity also included under Directive 2 and 9625 the instructor operating station being upgraded to tell the instructor where the controls were, and this has got to be in a pretty user-friendly way, where the controls were, the VN diagram, essentially relating to the speed and G levels and the structural capability of the airframe, and the alpha beta plot telling you about yaw and pitch angle of attack. We largely, as we've talked about before, largely look at level D simulators for these. The FAA do accept a level C device or even a level B device, and as it's been made clear, if a device is capable of showing you the correct way to behave, an initial standard, then it's still useful versus not doing it at all or doing it on the aeroplane. I'm old enough to remember having to do Dutch roll training in the aeroplane on the 727. still gets 10 years growth out of me to just think about it. So going up in RPT jets to practice stalling is not something we'd go back to lightly. So the transitional requirements, we amended the Part 60 Manual of Standards very significantly in September 2019. That took out about 70 pages of it. It created adherence to the ICAO models and FAA and EASA. It became very quickly apparent, especially with COVID, that industry wasn't going to be able to manage that, and we didn't even have any real certainty when they might be able to. So the first change made to it was fairly quick. CASA added another 2 years to it. And as it became clear that airlines were coming out of COVID, it still wasn't going to be with the supply chain problems and SME problems for upgrading devices. We added another 2 years to that. So I'll show you that in a minute. The upgrades include the IC models, and I really don't want to downgrade in any way, shape or form. The fact that we don't have a lot of icing problems here in Australia doesn't mean it's not an issue. If you look at the world statistics on varying stall and near stall incidents and accidents, Australia features in them in the turboprop area especially. So the icing models have got to be there for a couple of icing things. We also need a very high level of instructor capability, not to just say to students, there's one lot of icing that'll affect you. If you have students who are taking their license and heading off overseas to different places where there is severe icing, those who've done it will know that there's no such thing as just one form of icing. You're teaching people to watch out when the temperature heads down there and there's precipitation, or you've been in that way of flight. You've got to be looking out, because the simulator will not teach you everything. It's just one snapshot of icing tests. The full stall, obviously, and as I said, that means from our point of view, we would have the 10 degrees beyond the initial stall indication, the FAR 25 indication. Gusty crosswind landings, CASA hasn't really mandated that they are necessary, nor the bounce landing. I privately have views on whether the bounce landing capability is a giant step forward in aviation. But from our point of view, if it's there, we will test it and it'll be on the certificate, but it's not mandated. And all of that brings the qualification certificate that Roger, as the delegate, finally signs and goes up on the wall in your simulator section. And that's called the extended envelope training capability. And this is what you'll see on a certificate. It'll have the Y for yes next to each one. For those who haven't seen it, and I'm sure most of you would have, but if you haven't seen it, this is an indication of what's called the alpha beta plot, pretty simply. It shows the side slip and the angle of attack. Now, this is in ICAO document 9625 or 10011, I forget which. But that little bit in the middle that looks like an inverted arrowhead is the area where we can say there's a moderate level of confidence in there. That the area outside that in the big cross that goes around the arrow, that there's a moderate level of confidence. That might have come from a wind tunnel, engineering cab simulator, varying places. Outside of that, it's extrapolated and there's a low level of confidence, but the probability that the aeroplane and the simulator would behave roughly the same. So that's one of the things that an instructor can look at, can use for debrief. I'll skip through this next bit. Oh, sorry. Yep. Yep. So you can see on this, the alpha beta plot, the top left-hand diagram, there's the VN diagram and the controls themselves, and then you can see what the pilot can see on their primary flight display or whatever it's called in that aircraft type. So they are things that we would like to see on any device, because if someone says, I haven't even got near stalling or near a structural damage to the aircraft, and the answer, as someone pointed out this morning, was, how do you know? This way the instructor knows, and it can be captured. You can replay it for people and tell them where they nearly went wrong. And if you are wondering about the relevance of some of this, the A300-600 that crashed in Queens, New York, American Airlines Flight 587, where despite having been trained in a fully qualified simulator, the pilots were trained in a recovery method and over-enthusiastically used that method to take the tail section off the aeroplane, the rudder and vertical stabilizer first. This diagram, the VN diagram, would probably have picked up that, as would have the ability to see what the controls were happening, what was happening with the controls. So these are pretty critical, as critical as the physical upgrade of the fidelity itself. 18 simulators have been updated, 10 aren't being, and some of those are because an operator who's got more than a couple of one aeroplane doesn't have to upgrade a device. It simply can't be used for UPRT training. One has been upgraded only with the instructor station tablet, and 4 are going to be upgraded before March. We will get down to the 2 or 3 last devices left where we'll have to have deeper, meaningful discussions about exactly how they're going to get UPRT training if the device can't be upgraded. And that will be, it won't simply be, it's too hard, you don't have to do it, because I could then hear the screams from bean counters in other operators saying, why did we have to do it, let alone safety. But what will happen is that we'd probably mandate that those instructors do training in another aircraft type, preferably one that's similar, and that the students get extra training in the characteristics, the known characteristics of that of the type that they're on. Yeah, any questions on that? I'll yeah, so just remember the 23rd of March 2023. Just check, yeah, 24th of March 2023. By that stage, you will no longer be able to upgrade an existing simulator just for extended envelope. You'll actually have to upgrade the whole simulator. Now, that's not to say that CASA won't listen to, I know there's that one operator has some parts that are going to be on the ocean in, you know, in a ship, shipping container or something, along near that time, and we'll just listen to them as we'll listen to anybody about whether an exemption is required. But you need to keep that date in mind, because CASA's view was we wouldn't allow simulators to be upgraded forever. There'd come a time when we wanted essentially the device to be lifted up to the new Part 60 standard. So if there's no questions on that, oh, sorry.
Sorry to ruin your day again, John. Can we have that in writing about the last item there about using somebody else's simulator type or whatever? Because operators like myself with an aeroplane that there is one simulator in the world that is rubbish and doesn't simulate an aeroplane, let alone another type. You know, we use other aircraft that have got you know, very high res aero models. I'm happy to do a white paper for that to cover groups like Air Affairs, ourselves, and all the other you know, corporate aircraft, because most of those also have the same problem. They don't. You go to Flight Sim, FSI, or you know, Simcom, whatever. The simulator's got the right letter. That junk, basically.
Well, our Part 61 and Part 121 relate to the existence in the world for certain categories of aeroplanes of a device suitable for the training you need to do. This issue's come up. We've had endless conversations with the FAA. Someone digs an old DC-8 out, or even a DC-6 for that matter. And there is no simulator. What are you going to do? And they've figured out answers to everything. What we won't do is allow you to not use a device simply because it's inconvenient. If a quality device is somewhere and you fill into that Part 121 weight or passenger number, then you'd be expected to use that device. That's CASA's mandatory simulator regulations. But other than that, yes. And we'd expect some exploration, and this comes under Directive 2 as well. We'd expect some exploration of what was available, and that would include an SME who may have knowledge of the characteristics of your type versus some other type. And at face value, that might be a 717 would be quite similar, possibly, to a DC9. So if some operator in the States dragged a DC9 out of retirement, couldn't find a simulator, it may well be that an SME from Douglas, someone not in a wheelchair, could attest that the stall characteristics were much the same. We'd engage in that sort of conversation. We don't anticipate there are going to be very many of those conversations, though. Yeah, we'd need you, the operator, to do the investigation and come out with test reports. It could even be an article in Flight Magazine from the time where a test pilot flew the RJ aircraft and said it stalls the same as the 146. Regulators are stuck with lack of data, aren't they? So anything you can get, going back, as I said, to old magazine articles even, they're mentioned all in the advisory circular for the FAA. If you can find evidence that a machine doesn't give negative training, then by all means. Absolutely. We would simply ask that operators took the opportunity to get SME advice on what was the best thing to do. That's all. That we don't want. If someone's stalled the aeroplane and a similar aeroplane and is willing to put in writing, or if there's anecdotal evidence, etc. You're right, and there's no doubt at all that the basics of getting the aircraft out of the stall, the Air France crew and the Colgan crew didn't die because for lack of a generic capability of getting out of a nose-high buffet situation. Yeah, sure. But the one thing we have to remember is things like the icing model. So the actual icing situation on the aircraft, if it's got a stick pusher, is it taking icing into account? Is it taking center of gravity and the other things? Now, I know from the trouble we went to find the Fokker 100 logic behind the stick pusher, that took quite a long time to research that. You would want your pilots to understand that and understand the effect, and it will be listed somewhere. I mean, just not long ago, I came across the 70-page or so flight test documents for the Fokker 100. All this information's roughly available in writing somewhere. Someone once did a lot of it. Yeah. Well, there'll be, if there's anecdotal stuff, or you can get a retired bombardier test pilot to simply say, look, I can't comment specifically, but in general terms, it's an aeroplane, it stalls, push the nose down. I mean, that would have saved the Air France guys, sadly. Okay, look, I'll wind that up there. I just wanted to move now to, before we go on to the industry experience of moving UPRT into business as usual, and as Sanju said, you know, it's an admirable aspiration. We did this with CRM training, we did it with wind shear training, GPWS training, the use of live radar in simulators. All these things have been done before. They've come in as special projects, and PBN, another one, GPS, and now they've moved into the mainstream, and that would be our hope for everybody. But just wanted to give a chance now. If this conference is like every conference I've been to, come the middle of the afternoon, not only a bit weary, but wondering whether the point you wanted to ask is ever going to get asked by somebody else. So we just put in a bit of time there to ask any questions or make any points. I've already got probably 15 things to think about after this in whatever forum we choose to do that with. But so I just thought I'd give a chance. Janet said she came up here with a big list, so you can be first. Yeah, so I'll give the microphone to my colleague Darren and I'll start writing, but I'd love to hear the questions, please.
We might play journalists, I think. Neil, we'll probably get your presentation after the break, if that's okay. Yes. All right. FAQs from industry. Is that the title? Industry experience, move to BAU.
Yeah, no, thanks, John. So we're at Jetstar coming fairly close by middle of next year, having completed the initial baseline training, if you like. So what we're turning our mind to now is what the recurrent training package will look like. So I guess one question for the regulator is there going to be direction on that? If so, how specific? We've run an EBT program already, so no doubt that will be embedded in that process. But just wondering if there's any guidance that will be forthcoming that we'll look at to comply with, obviously. And from the industry, are there any other thoughts around that at this stage?
Interesting you talk about EBT, having recently done the Qantas EBT course, and we were talking about the regulations behind, or the proposed regulations behind our training, and where upset recovery was included in it, and the EBT standard that we're going to be using, it's actually I think it's called a level C training event, which is only once every 2 years, and clearly that's not enough for for recency. So we're going to change that, but that's not going to be part of the way it's regulated, if you like.
But likewise, and I think if you look at EBT training, they would argue that UPRT is every phase of flight that we currently utilise. So I think to Sanju's point, a UPRT will disappear as an acronym, because if we're preventing, whether it be me sitting there at high level being radar vectored into a headwind and then told, oh, turn left, holding pattern, come back to min speed, I'm going, no, I don't think that's acceptable because I understand my performance and where I sit. And I prevented something happening, that would be huge success in the program because we prevented. So I think we could say that we're doing UPRT every time we go in the sim.
And without putting John on the spot, we were looking earlier, numbers, I think around 30 training topics or somewhere around that mark for the EBT cyclic program, and the UPRT slots in nicely to quarter, a third, something around that. So that would be the general idea and direction to go. So almost every sim you'll see one component of that. Yeah, so it's more so though, do we regenerate what we've already done, or is there new bits? How do we mix it? You know, big questions, but the main one is for the regulator, I think, is there any guidance forthcoming or direction we should be looking at?
Doing that initial theory of you know, aerodynamics, which some people have forgotten. And I know one operator who we're dealing with, and he said he did a survey for this foundation training and asked them, okay, what's the normal for climb, attitude and thrust setting? What's the normal for cruise? And he was surprised at the variance of answers on that. And these are guys that have got, 4,000 or 5,000 hours on that aircraft. And they've been sitting there watching the magenta crosshairs and following the magenta line. So if you can establish that initial foundation training and then go into those more complicated, which is the style and surprise, which Shane alluded to, with the way your brain works, I think you're going to have a good toolbox within your pilot group to cope with things that happen down the track. And that's what we want to see. We can't, it's like the QRH, we can't address every emergency in the QRH, but what you're giving is a foundation and a toolbox by which, and with your check and train system, by which the pilots can adapt and be flexible. And that's part of competency is the flexible, the criteria, performance criteria, is the flexibility of conditions to cope with varying situations. And I think, as a regulator, as an operator, you're brand protective. That's what we all want to work towards.
Quentin wanted me to share just with the group, and I know that the guys across the ditch are listening with their upgrades on sims, is that the new icing models we have also have limitations. So just being aware of them prior to just saying, oh, we've got new icing and they're accurate. And the example being icing at 37,000 feet on an A320 and the iOS showing that it's fully stored when it's not. There's an example.
Yeah, we'd be really.
Sorry, Pete, you got. Yep.
So everything's going crazy over that. We were too. Sorry, guys. Got to use the mics to get online.
The reason I speak about it is the CA have provided a product. It's certified. It's now been approved for Jetstar, and under the instructors knowing the limitations of when they push buttons and what they're going to see on an iOS device. That's all. I think those things are really important as we can make too many judgment calls. So if they look at the plot later on, they could say, "Oh, are you fully stored?" They didn't. So yeah, but I agree there.
Yep, I've got a question for you, John.
Yeah, go ahead.
We started this conversation at the coffee machine, but I don't think we finished it. But can you confirm that you've firmly decided not to make UPRT a training endorsement under an FIR?
Look, it was discussed and the answer was no, that we couldn't bind a future CASA, but my understanding is no, there's enough training endorsements.
Yep.
I mean, we could all see an argument for it, but no.
Yeah, sure. I think it's probably not necessary if you're approving the UPRT, the training program at an organisational level, which covers the instructors.
We've moved towards an exposition model for Part 142 and for Part 121 or 119 operations. So that's where it's going to go.
Yep.
Yeah, look, I just want to reiterate the issue about the IC model. We'd really want to see instructors very deeply indoctrinated into what exactly is there. Now, the manufacturers will tell you that. Boeing got some good stuff, showing their ice accretion model, showing the effect on pitch, all sorts of stuff. But, an instructor can't come in the morning and be told there's an IC model and then work that afternoon. As far as Mike, look, good question. Just for starters, our first seminar on this that Sunju came out to Australia for 5 days that Roger organised back, I think it was in May of 2017 or 16. Anyway, 5 or 6 years ago. Who was at that? Right, maybe 4 people. And I know a couple of others that aren't here that were at that. Well, if we'd have been your A320 fleet then we're nearly all gone. So you'll need to be doing again and again just for the new intake. You'd say to yourself, oh, nothing's changed much. And then you look around and start to do the counting. Yes, they have changed, and a lot of guys will have gone. I'd suggest that information from your own training and checking system, the whole EBT concept, but start, as I said to you before, start looking under rocks. If you've had one stall event with near event with icing, and Australian operators like the Americans, they still keep having them, find out how many nearly happened, and then see does your training affect that, etc. So I'd let your SMS guide you as to where the risks were, but they may well come out in your flight data analysis showing people who, how many times did you get to full cruise EPA and the speed start to decline? But that's a fairly easy one to look at, and that's always the precursor to a nasty next few minutes.
I just had 2 quick points. The first one is you asked what the regulator thinks ought to happen. My first question is, what do you think needs to happen? And the reason I say that, I'm not asking you to answer that question now. I'm saying it because one of the things that we're trying to promote is more engagement and collaboration. And so we don't have all the answers. We can't have all the answers. And so when people have good ideas, they need to bring them forward, or clarifications around things. Don't just, I just suggest, don't come and say, what does the regulator ask? Because that helps to propagate that sense that we know everything. We absolutely don't. So if you've got a good idea, bring it forward. On the instructor model, I'd just like to make a couple of very quick points. We don't have any plan to introduce a UPRT instructor rating or anything underneath it. If it was to be that there is a strong request from industry that we ought to have or ought to do something about it, then we'd certainly respond to that request. But the general proposition is that we should be embedding the things that are important in relation to UPRT into the competencies of instructors.
And Sanju had a comment.
That the last comment, embedding those competencies into the instructors, that's music to my ears. That's exactly the kind of thing that we need to hear. My other comments were, one was about the icing, and there's a more general point that I'd like to raise regarding that. I don't hear enough discussion about the academics, because we really need to integrate the academics with the actual training in the simulators. And what we've also seen is you see some icing models, some are better than others, but if we have this notion that no 2 stalls are the same, try a stall with icing. They're very, very different. So it comes down again to the basics, to the understanding of the concepts that you can have a stall without any kind of warning taking place, because warnings are based on an angle of attack, and now the airplane's going to stall at a very low angle of attack, or do drastic things, have roll off, or these kinds of things. So let's be very careful, and be careful in what we're asking from the industry as well, because we need the training to be done right, and we don't want to introduce unintended consequences from this training. Now, going back to the previous point before that, how do we create these programs like the introductory program and the recurrent program? What we have found is that the first phase of the training in our operator initial training is really a sort of dissection of the airplane. So to develop a much better connection with the airplane, with its aerodynamics and flight fundamentals. And like I explained, the program that we've come up with over the last several years consists of around 50 to 60 exercises, very, very short exercises that build up that knowledge and skill. What we've also found is that by having the academics in an application, in an electronic-based application, it's much easier to connect that with the actual training. So with the simulator briefings or even homework that we give to the students, that's also a very successful part of it. So what I'm trying to say here is don't forget the academics and the power of that academics if it's done properly. What we also do for the recurrent, because we're required to do recurrence on a 3-year basis under EASA and other areas as well, is put it into different themes. So you can pick certain themes to focus on, such as high altitude or system failures or environmental upsets or whatever it may be. It makes the learning much more impactful. And that's where I think we need to be taking this. So simply to wrap it up, for me, it's very late here. I have to get to bed very soon. But for me, this consolidation of everything, of the knowledge, the skills, through the instructors to the pilots, I think that's the main message here. So I'm going to have to leave shortly, but I just wanted to end with those last few comments. And of course, if you have any other questions, I'll stick around, but otherwise I'll just wait for a moment if there are any other questions. And otherwise, I'd be happy to speak to you all at some other later date. And thank you for the opportunity to join you as well.
Yeah, well, I can't believe just what you've done in staying up at these hours. Thank you very much, Sanju. It's been a privilege to have you. And we will no doubt try and capture as much of this stuff in a revised AC as possible so that the learnings can actually be put in print and passed on. But thank you very much from us all.
You're most welcome. Thank you all. Nice to meet you.
Thanks. It's a question for CASA, really, or perhaps broader views. We heard earlier on that at least some students have a fear or at least some trepidation around stalling. We also saw that ICAO has a recommendation that UPRT is included in the commercial pilot license training. And our friends at CAE are already doing this on behalf of other authorities. I wondered if CASA has a plan or maybe a timescale for when it will introduce UPRT into commercial pilot training, just to bridge the delta which clearly exists at the moment between trainees and when they end up in an airline. That gap is shortening in terms of experience, but nothing is happening with the gap in this training.
Thanks, Pat. What time is it? Isn't it afternoon tea time, John? Yeah, very close, I think. I think this is an excellent question to put forward to the ASAP for advice. Having said that, I can say a couple of things. One is that we would be very responsive to a call from industry in terms of how we might progress. If I take myself back to the comments about the Part 61 knowledge and practical standards, which is where they sort of merge from, and some of the learnings that are going on in some of the flight training providers, this will also help. Correct me if I'm wrong, but the standards already go some way. So we're not starting from scratch, and it's trying to build on what we've got, and to take it forward in steps that are manageable, that are achievable, that are going to break the bank, that we can all be on board with. As the point I made in my opening remarks, that's I think how we would respond. I don't believe that we would want to have a decree that says this must be. It needs to come from industry, because at the end of the day, that's where it gets implemented.
Someone just made the comment that there's extra costs if we mandate on aeroplane training. I just reiterate that Flight Standards did a very detailed mapping of the requirements in 10011 to the entire MOS, all the different elements of it. There's very little that's not currently in some part of the MOS. We're not, the gap, the space, the playing field is not empty in that regard, Patrick. Mike, was it?
John, just a comment on that. This is a question from the online about increased costs for having aerobatic aircraft or aircraft for spinning. The Cessna 172 is certified for spinning in the utility category. And as a matter of fact, at our flight training facility, we use components of upset recovery in our RAOs light sport aircraft. Now, we don't pitch up and do nose high angular banks and get light in the seat and all that sort of stuff. But what we do is identify the safe space. If you're in trouble, lower the nose, unload the airplane if it's loaded, return the airplane to straight and level, set cruise power, assess and adjust. And you know, the startle effect and all that sort of thing that we've been talking about is educating these people like that. So there's different levels, and that's why we've got a basic UPRT and advanced UPRT. And at the UPRT conference that we had in August, we talked about a whole bunch of things of where does it fit in. And this is about where we expand on the MOS Part 61 standards at the moment, is that they're already written there. We're just not doing them effectively. And we don't need an aerobatic aeroplane to go and teach somebody to unload the wing and return the aeroplane to straight and level, set cruise power. That's the basic thing. So using, teaching smarter and using the tools available within the prescribed limitations of the Aircraft Pilot Operating Handbook, we can still get the message out there. Sure, people like Shane and Jeremy and myself and other people, I totally get the undesire to have another flight instructor rating in a 121 environment, but I think it's essential, and I talked about it earlier, about a flight instructor teaching UPRT needs to have the appropriate training, because it's clear that the message is not getting through while we're all out there doing what we're doing. But we don't need aerobatic aeroplanes to teach people the basics.
G'day everyone, Jeremy Miller from UPRT Australia. I think we've had a lot of really great conversations in the room today, and thank you, John and CASA, for putting this on. I just want to make a couple of very quick little comments that I think at the airline level, you guys are fixing the symptoms, which is great, but not the root cause, okay? Can I encourage all of you just to think back to your basic pilot training and the stall training that you did? Most instructors will teach students to recover from a stall as soon as they get to a stall. So you take your typical commercial student who's spent maybe 30 seconds, if they're lucky, beyond the critical angle of attack, and they get to an airline and they're not recognizing that the aircraft stalled. Honestly, I'm not surprised. Okay, so I think we as an industry need to actually take a step back and look at what we have been delivering as instructors for so long and how we can better do the training, because I've been in this part of the industry, the flying training industry, for 21 years, and we've had the Day VFR syllabus, the Part 61 MOS now, and as good as those documents are, I can tell you firsthand that nothing has changed in 21 years. Instructors are still teaching the same things the same way and just ticking the boxes, saying that they're compliant with the MOS. So just to address a comment from yourself before, Roger, about coming from industry. Honestly, industry doesn't want to change if they don't have to. Okay, that requires work, that requires effort, and the only way we're really going to get the industry to change, I believe, is if it's driven from the regulator level and education is used to improve the standard of pilot training. Now, that's really what it comes down to, because if we can fix this at a base level, if we can incorporate some of the core fundamental skills of UPRT at a basics pilot training, in 20 years' time, the airlines are going to love us, guaranteed. All right, it's not a quick fix. All right, so I agree with Pat Murray that this stuff should be incorporated at a basic level. It doesn't have to be aerobatic training on flight one, but there's lots of concepts that we can introduce. Second comment I'd just like to quickly make before we go grab a coffee, and I know I need one as well. Take Air France 447, Colgan 3407. They're a couple of the big accidents in our mind. Those pilots all received stall training. They all had emergency training, yet they never recovered from the situation they found themselves in. Okay, I don't think it's a hands and feet issue. I think it's a human factors issue. Okay, pilots need to be educated about startle and surprise. And so my recommendation to CASA is, if you're going to put a panel of people together to fix a problem, don't put any pilots in the room, put a bunch of psychologists in the room, and then listen to what they have to say. Okay, because we here all know how to fly an aircraft, but when the shit hits the proverbial fan, okay, we all turn into a bubbling mess, and that's what we need to fix. Yeah, that's a technical term. So cool. Anyway, thank you.
Thanks for that, and thanks for the challenge. I'm certainly up for it. What I was really trying to say was, in response to your point that nothing's changed for 21 years, I think what can achieve change is when the change is driven from within industry. I was at a Rototech conference, also this Rototech conference up in Brisbane a couple of months ago. And it was very enlightening to me, some of the messaging that was coming from that conference from the industry. And it was a little bit on the lines of, there are too many accidents. Why aren't these machines crashing? What aren't we doing? This is industry people, not CASA. What aren't we doing? If we don't do something to fix this, we won't have people wanting to get into the machines, and that's our businesses down the gurgler. Throughout that conference, there was a strong theme that the change needed to come from industry. And I think that's an absolutely wonderful thing to do, because if we've got that, then as the regulator, we can work with industry to leverage on that determination to make a change. Now, I've got enough people in here in this room that are passionate about this particular subject, and there are more out there. There's plenty of people in industry who are motivated. We need to get them on board and drive the change, and not wait for CASA to drive the change itself. That's my challenge to you.
Cool. Yeah, thanks, Roger. Just to comment on that, I think definitely at the airline level, yep, there's the push from industry, but I think your typical GA flying school, your 141, 142 school. I've been head of operations for numerous organisations, and the amount of paperwork that I had to do really meant that I wasn't able to get out there and engage with instructors and help to improve the instructors. So my recommendation would be the first step, just to reduce a lot of the administrative burden, to allow the senior instructors out there, who are now becoming fewer and further between, to actually work with the junior instructors and to give education. Now, I believe that coming out of the backside of COVID, the industry is at a point where we have a lot of airline pilots who were retired during COVID and have gone off to different things. We've had 2.5 years of a lot less commercial pilot training, and so less commercial pilots becoming instructors, okay? And we are at the precipice of a point of time in the industry where we don't have the next generation of instructors to train the next generation of pilots, okay? And with the airlines, how they're recruiting at the moment, I mean, it's great for them to suck everyone out of the industry, but it's going to leave no one at the grassroots level. So this is a major, major concern, that we're going to have kids teaching kids who have absolutely no experience at all. So this is going to get a lot worse before it gets better.
And finally, Roger, that's exactly why I set up that UPRT conference in August. And there were 30 people plus there, including your team, and they were all passionate, or they would not have come. The problem is that if Paul Strike goes to a flying school next door and says, "Hey, I saw you guys do a high angle of attack slap on the runway, pancake type landing. Would you like to talk about unloading and they'll just go, mate, this is our school, bugger off. This is the reality. So yes, there are, and I think there's enough people coming to you, but you're the conduit to make it happen through appropriate guidance. Thanks.
Agreed. All right, let's take a break, 15 minutes, and we'll be back. So for online participants, we'll be back at 15:30 Australian Eastern Daylight Time. See you then. Just pop that in front of Peter's. That's his USB. His USB. Yeah, thank you. Oh, we don't get sponsors like your conferences. Okay. My daughter's got your windsock. You know your little windsock? Yeah, she's got it on the back of a bike. 12-year-old riding around with a windsock on. Yeah. There he is. Yep. So John Lamarquand is up next. John Lamarquand from Fonda. And then Neil. Yep. So
Okay, folks. When we were putting the agenda together for today, one of the things that came up was that just as CASA had moved UPRT entry control to a BAU activity, so had Qantas, who were the early adopters of UPRT. And I think the last long discussion I had with, James Boland was at the point where he said, no, we've moved, and this was quite some months ago, we've moved it into a business as usual activity. It will now become absorbed into our normal way of being. So I just thought I'd lean on our brothers and sisters from Qantas, or brothers from Qantas here, from the various parts of the far-flung empire, and give us an idea on how it's worked moving UPRT into a BAU activity.
Now you guys come up. Thanks very much, John. Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. For those that don't know me, John Lamarquand, the Airbus training manager from Qantas. And we're at very interested to hear what everyone else is doing in the industry, particularly the high capacity RPT. We meet regularly with our fellow AOCs in the Qantas group and talk to those guys and girls. So be very happy to hear what the other AOCs are doing. To get that started, I thought I'd give you a little bit of an update on where Qantas is at for those that are interested. We've probably break it down into 4 phases. The SIM update, the SIM upgrade, which John spoke to earlier, is pretty much underway. We've got all but one of our 9 simulators upgraded to the extended envelope. Hasn't been without its challenges. It's very labour intensive, both from our sim tech side, CASA side as well. Of course, we've got to get them in, and also from our SMEs, people like Matt and Pete here that have to go in and test and tweak and then qualify the sim. So it hasn't been without challenges. The other one is that unfortunately, I think every sim we own is built by a different manufacturer. And whilst they all comply more or less to the requirements, they are very different. And that brings in a lot of challenges for our instructors and a lot of challenges for our lesson plan writers, trying to run the same scenario. For example, on the 7.3, we've got 3 different sims. You've got the one lesson plan. You can't run it the same way in the 3 sims. So we have to write it in 3 different versions. And then the instructor's got to say, right, I'm in a CAE sim today. I can do, the overspeed protection this way. But if I'm in the L3 or the Harris, it's got to be done differently. So very challenging, but we're getting there. The next phase is instructor training. So we've had our project leads. So that started off with Matt Savage, Matt there, and Rob Crass, who was online. I think he's still there. Unfortunately, Rob's retired from Qantas, and now we've got Peter Spiess on board. So Matt, Pete, and Rob have done the lion's share of the instructor training, and they continue that. We're just saying to a couple of people in the break, we try and keep that very tight so that we maintain our standardisation and our quality control. And so Matt and Pete will go on there with, as we employ new instructors, obviously we need to train them up in UPRT. We've got all our instructors currently trained up to through our bridging modules, which I'll talk to next. The first 4 of those, we don't have them trained on the extended envelope. That's yet to come. We got them all trained up pretty early before COVID. Things were going very nicely. And the challenge we've had since then is recency and standardisation. So we trained all our instructors up, all set to go on UPRT, and then pretty much shut down like we all did for 2 years. Everyone went very cold. When we started up again and got the UPRT going, we had major standardisation problems. So again, Matt, Pete and Rob have done a lot of work for us there. We've made some videos, videoed some of the sequences in the sim, which we find is great for self-training, more for the instructors and the trainees. The idea is, how do you say it, Matt? Voyage of discovery. So it's great to see it in the sim, but for the instructors, it's very handy. They go, well, I haven't run, approach stall training for a while, and so I can sit down and watch a gold standard. Pete Spieth demonstrates a gold standard in the sim. We record it, and it's a little bit of a refresher. Likewise, we've got some tutorials in our lesson plans as well, just to help with our standardisation, but it certainly has been a big challenge. Our type rating, I'm not sure if there's any AOCs here that do in-house type ratings. Qantas does. Yep, we are at the moment as well. They've pretty much incorporated the first of our 4 of our 6 modules are into our type rating. So when someone comes onto a new type, that is incorporated. And when we finish off the rest of the modules, they will be incorporated as well. So that's talking to Sanju's presentation earlier. That's how we get our entry pilots, where they've come from another fleet or come from outside the business. That's how we get them up to the base level, basically, of UPRT. The bridging modules, so Qantas opted for 6. Our project leads came up with 6 modules. We're running 1 to 4 at the moment. We're on target to have all those finished by the end of last year, but the 2-year COVID hiatus has put that on hold. It's also been held up with EBT. Qantas is moving to EBT hopefully from December. So we've had to train our instructors there and rejig our recurrent. So that's held us up as well. So we'll regroup and probably rehash or refresh the first 4 modules in 2023. Meanwhile, we'll develop modules 5 and 6, which are the advanced envelope. That will require training of our instructors in the advanced envelope, because as was mentioned earlier by both CASA and by Sanju, you can't jump in a sim and deliver extended envelope training unless you've been trained in it. It's not something you can teach yourself, as those who have done it before would know. And we would hope to have those incorporated into our recurrent training in 2024. So where we're going with that, hopefully by 2024, we'll have all our UPRT incorporated into our type rating training. It'll be seamless. You won't do UPRT, you'll just do a type rating, but you'll come out with UPRT in it. And the same in our recurrent training. And we see the EBT fitting well with the UPRT. Particularly the startle and surprise, that really ties in very well. And the point was made as well in one of the breaks, one of the conversations, that UPR takes on many forms. So you won't need to do a stall every 6 months you're in the sim. It might be a recovery from a wind shear. It might be an upset on landing, a bit of wake turbulence on final or something. That's all UPRT. And a lot of it's the startle and surprise. And of course, the non-technical skills are the basis of EBT. So that fits in very well. So just to finish off, paraphrasing what Sanju said, hopefully by 2024, at the end of that, we actually won't have a UPRT program, but we will have UPRT. Did you gentlemen want to add anything as our experts?
If I may, John, just regarding talked about theory and the academics. One of the great advances I've seen in the Qantas program is including a ground school 4-hour session of theory. And the feedback we're getting from the trainees is fantastic. Every course I've run, which has been quite a few, I've had people come up to the end saying, why the hell haven't we done that before? Because it's a great refresher of aerodynamics and human factors, the startle effect, all those things that we've already talked about today, that these people who are coming into as trainees probably haven't thought about for 30 years. since they did their ATPL or their whatever they did. So that's been a real advance.
Any questions from the online participants? You've got to turn your video on just to make sure you're dressed or something.
You raised an interesting point, which is that this program has had an interesting benefit across the board in outcomes in training, that ultimately you get a better class, better quality, whatever you want, with pilots. They've actually got closer back to stick and rudder stuff. The second one is how much year on year, how much extra time is this out of a pilot's revenue flying days?
Yeah, two good questions. So it does improve the pilot quality, and one example is unreliable airspeed that there's a lot of focus on, which requires pitch and attitude to be set, and the quality of that has gone through the roof, from people who struggled to maintain control to now, from what's normal, a much greater awareness of pitch and thrust settings. So it does improve that. And on the tangent there, I think it's also improved our instructor quality. The training that Matt and Rob and Pete have give our trainers and our other trainers improves the non-technical skills. It improves our operation generally as an instructor. And if I can go down a little bit of rabbit hole on what Shane and other speakers said earlier, it was a bit divided in the room. And for what it's worth, my opinion is that I think all those skills that a good UPRT instructor requires, I'd suggest probably handy for any instructor. They should have all those skills. And certainly at Qantas, all our simulator trainers will be UPRT qualified, and it's part of the job. If you can't deliver non-technical skills, you've got to be able to deliver UPRT. You've got to be able to be a type expert. And so we just train people that. In terms of time, we put it in the type rating. And so we put 6 hours of modules into the type rating. So that's a sim and a half. And previous HOTOC, James Boland, just rolled his eyes and said, you'll never get that. But of course, there's obviously a lot of UPRT already in type ratings. We've all done them. They've all got stalls, upset recovery, pitch and thrust. So what do we reckon? About an extra hour and a half all up? One session, yeah. And it probably wasn't the full 4-hour session. So it was probably 3 and we rounded up to a session. Yep. Yeah. And that was across the 4 different types we've got. In terms of recurrent, which I think was your question, John, not at all really. We just incorporate it. So EBT, our EBT program is 2 days, twice a year. Day 2, there's a 1-hour in-seat instruction, which might be handling, it could be upset recovery. So it actually doesn't add on, it's just incorporated. We always had stalls and upset recovery in our recurrent training, and that's just been replaced with UPRT. So once everyone's trained up, hopefully no cost. Yeah, which fleet was it? Is it on? Yeah, we're doing it all. So we've got the 73, 78, 330 and 380. And subtle differences. The 73, no offence, is probably the most different type wise. The fly-by-wires, very similar. And in fact, our 330, 380, we pretty much interchange instructors. So our SMEs actually swap across the two.
Anyone else? Anyone online? Any questions for John?
Thanks for the opportunity, John.
Thanks very much.
Great. Next, we've got Neil Schaefer from RA Oz. He's going to be giving a presentation as well.
Thanks, Darren, and thanks to the delegates for your attendance and for everyone online and joining us. Just while Darren brings up my presentation, there it is there. Just want to say it's very humbling for a young kid that used to be just watching you guys fly airliners out with East West when I was a duty ground controller, to be standing here amongst some of the very experienced trainers, pilots, instructors and managers for the aviation sector. Of course, we work at the opposite end of this industry, which is the old Ultralight Federation, and my job is, first of all, Neil Schaefer's my name. I'm the RAL's head of training development for the organisation. Previous, I was the assistant head of operations for the organisation for 8 years, and CFI approvals or pilot exam approvals. I've been flying for 45 years and got my first instructor rating when I was 17 with gliders. So, but my whole life has been at the non-commercial end, at the sport and light sport end of the industry. The interesting thing, and I might just touch on something Roger said. Roger mentioned he wants change to come from the industry. And I think it's really important to think back where we came from, because we were just crazy guys flying around ultralights in single seaters under 9510 after we first got a regulation. And of course, we agitated DCA at the time, or CAA, to say we need to get out and train. Training is the most important safe thing for a safety outcome. And I think today is going to prove that in terms of UPRT. But once we got 95-25 and we started training, our fatality rates and our accident rates went down. We needed a heavier aircraft. We needed so we agitated to say, we need more. We're not just cowboys flying around in single seat ultralights, broomsticks. We needed to get out and actually train people. And once we implemented training, and of course we standardized that over the last 30, 40 years, now we actually are an important partner in, I guess, the basic training, back to basics training. So I believe RAOS has got a very important part to play in not only the basic training and how we prepare pilots for industry, but also just for whether they're recreational pilots or they're moving it as part of a career path. We're seeing a lot more integration in the industry these days, where people start from RPC to RPL, then go straight through to CPL. And I myself have trained probably 20, 25 pilots that are now working in the airlines as FOs and so on. And I occasionally catch them on the bridge as I'm jumping on the aeroplanes. So it's great to see that transition. But a few themes have been coming out, and that is that UPRT is really a response to the fact that we could actually retail a basic training. And I think if we get basic training right, we are actually preparing pilots for whatever vocation they might choose to have. And we believe we can offer some help in that area. So first of all, let's just have a look at where we're at. At the moment, we've got a CASA approved syllabus that we work where we are the first full Part 149 approved self-administering organisation. So we traditionally are still holding on to a syllabus that we've had really since probably about 2000, which was the old CAR 5 Day V of R syllabus. But we believe that upset prevention strategies and things that we do in training and basic training are a key tool. And I think everybody, this came out of October, it came out of our August conference, but we were working on, Paul and I have been working on this for nearly 4 years now. And obviously the industry's been working on it since 2014. But our key thing is to look at loss of control. We look at the safety data with a mature safety management system now, and we look at loss of control events. And I've probably investigated 10 to 15 fatals and probably over 200 non-fatal accidents, serious accidents. And we see basic mismanagement of controls in loss of control. And so we take that back to obviously the syllabus, and we look at where there are deficiencies, where the focus has been, and we say, well, how can we fix this? Because the syllabus really hasn't changed much since probably 1918 at our basic level. This is what we currently do in terms of UPR, or unusual attitudes. As you can see, there's a lot of procedural stuff in there. We cover spiral dives, but there's really not a lot in there in terms of upset prevention. Now, that's fine, because that's how mature the industry was probably only 10 years ago at the basic end. Part 61 has got similar competencies, but they're much more developed with non-technical skills. But I looked at that and I said, well, we need to, first of all, that's an add-on at the end of the syllabus in element 11. What can we do to actually improve that? And we've spent a lot of time talking to industry specialists at the moment and working with the GA and sport end of the sector to see what we can do. I think this is the key that we first had to come to terms with, and maybe the DA40 sort of opened this up. And of course, we fly light sport aircraft as one of the key aircraft types that we have in our private and training environment. And so the definition of what was an aircraft that was approved for spinning or non-intentional spinning, and what constitutes a pro-spin input, I would argue that just about every time somebody goes to a wing drop or an incipient spin, they're actually putting in a pro-spin input by putting an opposite aileron. So by virtue of our own current training and startle and surprise, we're actually seeing pro-spin inputs being used all the time, which is why we end up in spins. But the man that started all this, I guess, actually said those very important words. And I think that's what we have to do. We have to say that it's one thing to have a safety system that pulls us away from things that are potentially dangerous. But in doing so, and with good modern aircraft design, the edges aren't sharp anymore. They're quite soft. And when they're soft in the flight envelope, pilots feel brave enough and are not aware of an impending situation. They're not recognising. And so we're seeing this in a lot of our light sport aircraft. You can sit there and bunt them into the stall and they'll sit there and just waft away 1,000 feet a minute sink rate. But it's not the trauma hawk, or it's not that rapid departure and that huge wing drop and straight into an inverted spin, which a lot of the old, 30s, 40s biplane aircraft used to do. And so our aircraft, like our cars, have become really good. But the problem is that we haven't got any better as pilots. And of course, we try to build systems integration and electronics to fix these problems. But at the end of the day, we've got to come back to making better drivers and better pilots. So this is what we believe we need to do. And we've identified this as part of our project plan. I've actually already drafted the syllabus and it's in revision. I'll talk about our change management process in a moment. But we need to identify the key elements for pilot competency in recognising and preventing upsets. Right now, we have a rote-based syllabus competency that looks at training, effects and controls, sequence, straight and level, climbing, descending. I would argue that if we get this right, every single element of the basic flight training syllabus will have an upset prevention and a recognition element in it. And for example, effects and controls. We've talked about it today. If we could actually show a pilot in effects and controls the limit of pitch vertically, the limit of roll laterally, and the limits of yaw and recognition of yaw from the horizon, not the ball, then we're actually already halfway there in the first lesson. And we start to build some of those primacies that have been talked about today. So our current systems and specialists in UPR training elements, one of the issues we've had, of course, is that we fly in uncertified aircraft that aren't approved for spinning. And so it's been very difficult for us to actually sort of look at the extended part of the envelope. So I guess with our proposed weight increase, where potentially we'll get some aircraft that might be able to be used for spinning, but more importantly, the change in the industry, where we're now seeing up to 30% of our training providers are immersed in either flight specialist operations activities, like Paul, who are also RAO's approved flight training schools, as well as other schools that are using the RAO's training system as a bridge to their other training offerings, including UPRT. So we now have a resource base, both internally and across the sector, that we can draw on now, and specialists that we can actually start to roll out. So we've got capacity now that we probably never had 10 years ago. So I think that, as I said before, we have to identify the key ab initio elements where UPR can be inserted into basic control, skill management, because inevitably when we unpick incidents and accidents, most cases, including the human factor elements, it's a control management skill and a recognition skill more than anything. So we can build that better, and building better human factors elements into upset recognition training is really important. Can't be understated. We've talked about it today. Don't need to go over it again. Startled and surprise, and I agree. It's a psychology. It's not necessarily not a technical skill. It's a non-technical skill that probably a few of us in the room understand very well, but I think a lot of our instructors don't. We have actually built already and are currently testing an RAO's UPRT syllabus for pilots and instructors. Important note that the instructor syllabus might include the same elements, but it's a significantly different level. And I want to stress that, because I think another thread that's been quite common throughout this is that the instructor competency in the delivery of this is important because two reasons. We need to get the standardisation right, and we need to break the cultures that already exist. And the other thing we need to do is we need to actually make sure that we're actually building the right base, because if we teach this wrong, we'll do more damage to the industry at the base level, and in our small space, we'll actually turn pilots away. So I think it's really important that we do, and I would urge CASA to seriously look at their endorsement of standardisation and training, so that industry can feel confident that there is some degree of mandate to make sure that the right people are teaching upset recovery. And of course, what we've got to do now is look at an implementation with a post-implementation review. Now, we're at the very small end of this industry, but we want to be aligned with industry, as I said. So this is, thank you very much. This is why we're here, to learn what the top end of industry is doing. But I think there's an open acknowledgement that there's a vacuum in where we need to go next in terms of general aviation and light sport and recreational training. And the synergies may or may not, I think the basic synergies are going to be there for commercial and for airlines. But obviously, what we can do in the light sport areas, we can teach much better control management and control recognition and in our basic pilots. And as I said, we're seeing a significant number of pilots coming through now that are going through RPL Bridge, which was created through the RPL in 2014. And we're now seeing a lot of that being built as a cost-effective way for people to actually be vetted and work through into the CPL environment, which is where you get your pilots all from. Now, we're not in 142s. In 142s, that happens directly, and that's fine. But there's still a significant number of people that come through 141. And as we saw in one of the earlier presentations, a lot of these people go out and will hour build and spend 400 or 500 hours mustering and working in charter operations in Broome and the Kununurra and places like that, where these skills are really important. So one of the things we want to do in our basic syllabus, so there's two parts to this. We've built a UPRT syllabus. But the important thing I've learned over the last probably 12, 18 months is that it's not about just having a syllabus. It's really a panacea for addressing the basic training issue. If we fix the basic training syllabus, then the amount of emphasis in UPR, it just becomes natural and normalised. And I think the industry sort of said that today, and thank you, Qantas. I think that's the work you've done is just phenomenal at your end. So one of the things I see a lot is we see a lot of students that will spend 4 or 5 hours, and I think there was a training record brought up this morning, which shows probably an extreme case. But we do see a lot of people do the minimum 4 or 5 hours in upper air work and then move into circuits. And it may or may not surprise you to see that I've seen training records with up to 30, 40 hours of circuits. Now, other than digging a bigger trench in primacy, and probably incorrect primacy, it creates a lot of frustration. You see a lot of disinterest. You see a lot of discontinuation. So people in the industry say, "Well, UPRT is going to cost me more money. Why why do I have to invest more time?" My argument, and it's been proven out by some very progressive schools that we have working in our sector, that if they do more work in this area, in slow flight, stall recognition, startle and surprise, then they spend less time in circuits. So when a balloon happens, they're not trying to fix it. We're not getting damaged aeroplanes and outages and that cost the businesses as well. So in fact, by doing it this way and turning it upside down, we actually spend less time in those areas which are prone to become frustrating in the training process, and we actually get better primacy right from the start. So of course, all the things we've talked about there, angle of attack recognition rather than stall speed, all the buzzwords and all the common themes that we've heard today, that's what and breaking up stalling particularly into a number of lessons. Paul mentioned this morning his slide about the fire hose. That's exactly what happens at our end of the industry. People are coming in with stars in their eyes. They want to fly. They're 14, 12-year-old kids. They start at all ages. And of course, the reality of learning, some get it and some don't, but we're throwing a lot of information in at basic stage. Now, if you're 14, if you remember back that long, it's a bit hard for me, but we sponge it all in and we become rote learners and we adapt. But we also get a lot of 40, 50-year-old people that are just, didn't buy a Harley or go on a world trip. They decided they wanted to learn to fly. And of course, that primacy is hard to unpick. So it's really important that we spend time. And I remember when I went flying, I did probably 200 hours flying in the right set of Comanches and Musketeers and God knows what else with a good mate of mine. And, you know, illegal as it might have been, got plenty of sick time. But it was all upper air work. We used to come to Amberley and so I basically knew how to fly into strips and fix Pi radios and do sorts of things when I was only about 14, 15 years old. These days, it's the McDonald's methodology. How long is it going to take? How fast can wait? Where's the menu? Tell me what I've got to pay. And we've got to break that. I don't know how we as an industry break that because it's a societal problem. But in aviation, it really doesn't have any place. And I think the only way as responsible organisations is we can immerse people more through the syllabus in areas where they're going to get this basic training and they're going to get this basic primacies. So I won't go too much more about that, but you'll see, is that my timer that's telling me that? But obviously we want to break critical lessons into a number of parts. So turning and advanced turning, stalling and advanced stalling, and do all these things before we even send somebody solo. Because I often talk to instructors and I say, pilots as well, demonstrated, even instructors for instructor assessments, demonstrate adverse yaw. They don't know how to demonstrate adverse yaw. And yet yaw is one of the core problems that causes a stall spin. So this is one of the things, and this is the instructor problem again. We see it rebreeding in the cycle. So basically, and excuse the order because I keep changing the order around, but they'll be the elements that we've got at the moment in draft review. I've got a training review panel within the sector, and some of those people are here today, where we're actually looking at these elements and we're breaking down. So I won't go into all the details, but we've basically built a 13-element syllabus, which I believe covers most of the key elements that we need to cover in terms of basic upset training. Now, when I say basic, there'll be 2 levels in there because obviously with instructors, we're going to be, we've told CASA through our exposition and directly that we will mandate UPRT training for instructors. We haven't set a time limit at the moment, but we've actually formally written to CASA and advised them that so we're already moving ahead. So we want to move with the industry because we don't want to be out of sync, and I want to make sure that what we do is actually covering most of the areas. And I'm relying on experts. So I'll give you my details at the end of this presentation, and I'd ask anyone who's got expertise in this area as well. I'm happy to talk to you. One of the things I've learned in 40 or 50 years is that if you think you know it, you probably don't. So I'd reach out to any one of you if I could and ask for your advice. And I've certainly listened intently today. So they're basically the elements that we're going to be looking at. And of course, one of the big areas we look at is balanced flight, turning flight, because how many people actually stall other than trying to drag it in off the end of the strip in a 1G sustained stall? Not a lot of people. There's nearly always an imbalance or a yaw or a roll element to it. And of course, this happens in landing where we see runway excursions, R-locks and so on. But it also happens on takeoff with mismanagement of precession and P-forces and all those areas, things that we all see. So this is where we're going to spend a lot more time in looking at these states. So Paul, and we talk about the 11% box. We train to the 11% box. This is a syllabus designed to try and stretch that out to about 30 or 40%. Within the limitations of the aircraft, and I think someone said today, we can do a lot of these elements in an RAO's non-certified aircraft. It's not certified for intentional spinning. So this will be copied, obviously. Can I have a look at it? And I'd appreciate your feedback on it. So summary, this is what we're expecting. Training and immersion in upset recognition, most important, prevention and recovery will build understanding and resilience in our pilots. I think there's an echo in the room. Skills developed will have a direct and positive outcomes on preventing loss of control. Loss of control events. Sorry, mate. You're almost ready. Yep. Just go. Can you go back? Just go back to the last slide. So that one. Yep. competent and innovative training delivery in practical elements. This is different to a lot of discussions been today where it's all about synthetic and simulation training. We believe we've got the opportunity to actually heavily focus on the practical elements, the actual in-flight, human factors, skill development in lightweight aircraft, where we can actually prepare pilots much better for whatever their vocation might be. So, and we believe that this is critical. I honestly believe that if we get this right, we're going to fix so many other areas of loss of control, whether it be loss of control in flight, the most dangerous flight elements, or loss of control in circuit, in takeoff, landing, all those areas, runway excursions. I believe we'll fix a lot of those issues. And but again, we won't see this change. Someone just mentioned it. This will take 20 years. We won't see this change. But what we want to prepare is a product for the market that actually has this already basically embedded. So when they come to you, they actually have already understand this. They've got it. And then it's just about type referencing, training and specialising. So one of the other things we're doing is we're doing a lot of work on promotion of this and really unpicking loss of control. And we've developed a video series which starts next month in our National Safety Month. We've just published the trailer, which I'm happy to play. It only goes for about a minute. And my details are at the end of that slide. So if anyone wants to reach out, I'm sure through Darren once this is published. But this is a trailer for our loss of control series, which is being launched in October this month. And thank you very much for your time.
Thanks very much, Neil. That's much appreciated, and I look forward to seeing the finished products. I've had to cut our friend Dave Pilkington short. I'll circulate the stuff that Dave sent us. We've just run out of time. It's very similar to some of the points made. I'm going to make up a matrix to show the similarity and areas of common ground, and we'll circulate that with the minutes or the proceedings of today. Just quickly, thank you very much all for making the effort to come, those online too. Thanks to the Grace Hotel and to my comrade Dave and Sophia for helping us with today. I'd now like to invite Karen Blair, sorry. Sorry, I've known you too long. Karen Blair, who's the Senior CASA Officer in New South Wales, to just say a few words in closing. Thanks, Karen.
Thanks. Thank you, John. Karen Scrimes Blair. Hi, everyone. Good to see you. On behalf of CASA, I'd like to extend my thanks to all of you who've attended today, whether that be in person or online. And I hope that today was informative and enjoyable, and most importantly, takeaways that make it very productive for your attendance today. Thank you to all contributors for your suggestions and ideas. It's very important we all engage. Thanks must also go to those who've supported the workshop, especially our colleagues from CASA's training branch. Darren, thank you. And John, I know what a big effort that's been for you to put this together. And a big thank you to the Grace Hotel, who are the host venue for this event. It is of no small significance that Sydney has been the focus of much of CASA's UPRT development, including a number of industry engagement events previously. It's therefore appropriate that Sydney is part of the next chapter, and it's beginning here. CASA remains committed to continuing our engagement with industry, and that includes the unfolding and developing relationships with the on-aircraft training providers. So, in closing, CASA will continue to focus on assisting industry to deliver high-quality training with an emphasis on the key elements of the instructor, the student, the syllabus, and overarchingly standardisation. So we look forward to seeing how these principles can and will reduce and ultimately remove loss of control events. Thank you all for coming.
Thanks very much, Karen. Tomorrow morning from 9 o'clock till 11:30 at our CASA office up in Elizabeth Street, there'll be a room available if you need to talk further on any points or anything in confidence. My colleague Wayne Burns will lead that activity. If you need to do that, please be in touch with Wayne and make a booking in that time slot. We're more than happy to take anything on board, and we're more than happy to take those things that you think about on the plane home tonight that you wish you'd said today. Very much appreciate all your efforts in supporting this. Thank you.
Just a few quick follow-up things. As we mentioned at the start of the day, if the presenters are willing to share their IP, you can get in touch privately, that's fine. And then what we're probably starting to do with the help of gents like Paul and Neil, with the repository of resources, learning materials in this space, and with John's support, obviously, to create a learning library of information and resources that is widely accessible to industry and CASA, of course. But so I'll be in touch with that. I think there was only one thing, and we just thought we might get at the close, now that Karen's here, we can have maybe a group photo so that we could and a group photo, and we'll just share it to everyone. You can populate it if you like, and we'll ask all the online participants to turn their cameras on, and if we could line up here, I'll take the photo, I'll stand back there, and we might get some chairs for the important people.